Chapter 1. The Weight of the Sky. The heat pressed down on Kaelen Vance like a physical burden, a suffocating blanket woven from sand and despair. It wasn't the kind of heat that scorched skin, not directly. It was the heat of accumulated lies, of inherited responsibility, of a legacy built on shimmering deception. He shifted his weight, the frayed edges of the holographic tarp digging into the palms of his hands, and cursed silently. Another tear. This one particularly egregious, a jagged rip that had bisected a perfectly rendered depiction of a cloudscape, a pathetic imitation of a proper storm, of course. Kaelen Vance was, ostensibly, a Mirage-Patcher, a low-level technician employed in the outer dust slums of Neo-Sing, a sprawling, shimmering metropolis built on the back of the Vance Loom network. His job was to repair the holographic tarps that shielded merchant tents from the worst of the relentless desert sun. It was a tedious, humiliating existence, a carefully constructed illusion designed to mask a truth he desperately tried to ignore. The Vance Loom network controlled arrowweave, the microscopic light-bending fiber that underpinned almost every aspect of modern warfare, architectural design, and the increasingly opulent lifestyles of the ultra-wealthy. And Kaelen, the sole heir, was the guardian of the shimmering void, an ancient martial art, a secret he hadn't chosen, but one he now bore with an unbearable weight. The work itself was more intricate than it appeared. Arrowweave wasn't just a simple coating, it was a complex tapestry of refractive crystals, arranged in a specific pattern to mimic and manipulate light. The repairs demanded a precise understanding of depth perception, a delicate touch, and an almost intuitive sense of the way light behaved. It was a skill that felt disturbingly familiar, a ghost of a training head long buried beneath layers of corporate protocol and calculated neutrality. He glanced up at the oppressive dome of the holographic atmosphere shield, a shimmering membrane stretched taut across the skyline, filtering the harsh radiation from the sun and projecting a perpetual artificial twilight over the dust slums. It was a testament to the Vance Loom network's control, a constant reminder of the power he possessed and the responsibility he felt obligated to hide. Clumsy fingers, Vance. A voice dripped with disdain. Valen Thorne, Warden Thorne's son, emerged from the shadow of a towering hoverbike, a gleaming chrome machine that roared with a furious synthetic growl. Valen was everything Kaelen wasn't: arrogant, impulsive, and dripping with inherited privilege. He was a physical embodiment of the casual cruelty that permeated the district's security forces. Valen circled Kaelen, kicking a stray spool of fiber wire across the ground. Those who patch the fake sky are meant to swallow the real dust, don't you think? He sneered, the words laced with a blatant threat. He then, with a theatrical flourish, pointed to a holographic projector nestled amongst a pile of discarded tarps. You should try holding that above your head for a few hours, Vance. See if you can maintain a shred of dignity. Kaelen ignored him, meticulously realigning the edges of the tattered tarp. Had learned to absorb the insults, to compartmentalize the humiliation. The pain was a dull throb beneath the surface, a constant reminder of the life he was forced to live. Suddenly, a shadow fell over him. He turned to see Rhea, a woman with eyes the color of polished jade, and a quiet strength that belied her fragile appearance. She ran a makeshift shelter for refugees, those displaced and blinded by the unregulated industrial light traps that spewed toxic radiation from the city's power plants. She was a flicker of warmth in the desolate landscape, a testament to kindness he desperately needed. "You're still patching," she said, her voice gentle. She held out a chipped ceramic cup filled with chilled cactus milk, a rare and precious commodity in the district. "The sun is relentless." He accepted the drink gratefully, the cool liquid a momentary respite from the heat. "Thank you, Rhea." "Don't thank me, Vance," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "I see the way you handle the threads. It's not clumsy. It's precise. Like you understand the geometry of the light itself." She offered him a small, hesitant smile. "You're protecting something, aren't you?" something far more important than a few merchant tents. Just then, Valen's hoverbike roared back into view, accelerating directly toward Kaelen's workspace. He instinctively braced himself, expecting another outburst, another act of needless aggression. But before the bike could flatten him, Kaelen reacted. Without conscious thought, he dropped his spool of fiber wire. As his bare feet pressed into the burning sand, the blinding glare of the sun suddenly bent away from the courtyard, plunging the area into a cool twilight shade. He felt the subtle shift in the air, the immediate dampening of the light, the burgeoning potential of the shimmering void. He hadn't moved. He hadn't even consciously initiated the change. It was as if the space itself responded to his presence, bending to his will. The air shimmered, a testament to his hidden power. The world around him was momentarily held in a state of perfect, controlled refraction. Chapter 2. Echoes in the void. The silence that followed Kaelen's impossible demonstration lingered, heavier than the midday heat. 50 bewildered enforcers, their faces slick with sweat, and etched with a primal terror they couldn't articulate, remained frozen, weapons dangling uselessly. The dust motes, previously swirling in chaotic dances around the courtyard, now hung suspended, caught in a silent, iridescent ballet, orchestrated by the residual shimmer of the absolute refraction state. Even Valen, momentarily stunned, stood motionless, his carbon steel scimitar hovering inches from the ground, reflecting the unnatural twilight. Kaelen, however, was already moving. He wasn't basking in the surprise, or even consciously analyzing the moment. He was systematically gathering the shattered remains of his fiber wire spool, meticulously collecting each frayed thread and carefully tucking them back into their protective pouch. It was an almost meditative act, a quiet acceptance of the unleashed power, a recognition of the burden it carried. His mother, Seraphina Vance, CEO of the Vance Loom Network, didn't offer a word of congratulations. She remained on the dust-streaked ground, a sculpted figure of expensive silk and barely concealed disdain. Her gray eyes fixed on him with an unsettling intensity. The stealth dreadnoughts, sleek obsidian behemoths radiating an aura of cold, calculated power, remained silently hovering above, their advanced scanners diligently recording every aspect of the scene. It was a display of wealth and control, almost mocking in its extravagance. "Impressive," Seraphina finally said, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "A remarkable demonstration of potential. Your father would have been disappointed." The comment hung in the air, laced with a bitterness that resonated far deeper than her words. Kaelen didn't respond, his focus entirely on the methodical gathering of his tools. He had no desire to engage in the hollow platitudes of his family. He understood now, with chilling clarity, that his arrival wasn't a restoration of filial duty, but a strategic intervention. As he finished collecting the last thread, a low hum began to resonate from the dreadnoughts. A hatch opened, and a team of technicians, clad in sterile white suits and equipped with complex scanning devices, descended. They began to assess the damage to the holographic shield, running diagnostics on the atmosphere control system, and most intriguingly, focusing their sensors directly on Kaelen. Scanning for residual energy signatures, one of the technicians reported, his voice filtered through a vocoder. "Highly anomalous readings, sir. The refractive distortion is significant. It's as if the very fabric of space-time was momentarily altered." Seraphina stepped forward, her expression hardening. "Containment protocols, initiate. Secure the area. Eliminate the variable." Before Kaelen could react, a pulse of focused energy erupted from one of the scanners, aimed directly at him. It wasn't a weapon, it was a diagnostic probe, designed to analyze the energy fluctuations emanating from his body. As the beam washed over him, Kaelen instinctively activated the shimmering void. The effect was immediate and devastating. The energy pulse vanished, absorbed completely. The technicians, caught completely off guard, staggered backward, clutching their heads in confusion. The technicians' sensors overloaded, displaying a cascade of nonsensical data before shutting down entirely. The air shimmered violently, and for a heart-stopping moment, Kaelen felt the raw, untamed power of the void, threatening to overwhelm him. He wrestled with the control, carefully modulating the refraction, shaping the ambient light into a protective bubble around him. The process, honed over decades of intense training, was a painful exercise in control. It demanded absolute focus, a complete surrender to the chaotic energy of the void. He felt the strain on his body, the subtle shift in his internal equilibrium, the delicate balance between power and control. As he stabilized the distortion, a young technician, a nervous youth named Lin, cautiously approached him, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "What was that?" he stammered. "You manipulated light and space." "It's impossible." Kaelen didn't explain. He simply offered Lin a small, intricately woven piece of fiber wire, demonstrating the subtle play of light and shadow. "Observe," he said, his voice calm and measured. "The world is not always what it seems." The revelation of Kaelen's abilities had shattered the carefully constructed illusion of the Vance family's dominance. Seraphina, recognizing the existential threat her son posed, immediately enacted her next move. She approached him, not with words, but with an offer. "I know what you are," she stated, her voice losing some of its formality. "The shimmering void. A dangerous, almost forbidden technique. Your father hid it from me, believing it too volatile. But you, Kaelen, are the only one capable of harnessing it. I will offer you a position within the Loom network. Resources, training, the means to truly understand your potential." Her gaze held a veiled threat, a clear indication that this was not an invitation, but a proposition. Kaelen stared at her, the shimmering desert sand swirling around his feet, a subtle distortion in the air reflecting the turmoil within him. The offer was tempting, undeniably powerful, but he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that accepting it would be a surrender. He looked at Rhea, standing silently by, her protective gaze unwavering. He knew he wasn't merely protecting a few merchant tents, he was protecting something far greater. Something ancient and vulnerable, and he wasn't about to hand it over to the machinations of the Vance legacy. "I thank you for the offer," Kaelen said, his voice low and resolute. "But I decline." Chapter 3. Echoes of the Void. The air in Seraphina Vance's private observation deck, suspended high above the newly constructed agricultural sanctuary, tasted of ozone and regret. The deck, a shimmering cube of reinforced chromasteel, felt less like a space of authority and more like a containment unit. Seraphina herself was an unsettling portrait of controlled composure, dressed in a seamless suit of obsidian that shifted subtly with the ambient light, reflecting the desert's harsh glare with unnerving precision. Her face, framed by close-cropped silver hair, was a mask of studied disinterest, but her eyes, the color of polished jade, held a calculating intensity that unnerved even Kaelen, who had spent his life navigating the deceptive currents of his family's power. "You disappoint me, Kaelen," she said, her voice a smooth, low vibration that seemed to resonate through the deck itself. "The shimmering void is a potent weapon, a legacy entrusted to your lineage. To deliberately reject its mastery, it suggests a profound lack of understanding." Kaelen remained motionless, the subtle distortions in the air around him, a lingering echo of the absolute refraction state intensifying with her displeasure. He didn't meet her gaze directly, instead focusing on the intricate patterns of the hydroponic garden sprawling beneath the deck, a miniature ecosystem of controlled growth. "Understanding comes with acceptance," he replied, his tone even, devoid of the anger he felt simmering beneath the surface. "The void is not a tool for acquisition, Seraphina. It is a reflection of the universe itself, a delicate balance, easily disrupted by those who crave control. Sentimentality is a luxury I cannot afford," she countered, her hand gesturing towards a holographic display shimmering with projected data sensor readings from the entire sector, tracking the flow of energy, the movement of people, even the atmospheric pressure. Your refusal is a strategic vulnerability. The Loom Network's operations rely on precise control, on the ability to anticipate and neutralize threats. You, Kaelen, represent a chaotic variable, one I intend to eliminate. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the hum of the environmental systems and the rhythmic drip of nutrient solution from the hydroponic towers. Suddenly, a figure materialized behind Seraphina, unannounced, unacknowledged. It was Warden Thorne. Not in his usual swaggering, aggressive pose, but dressed in a simpler, though no less expensive, uniform of dark gray synth leather. He held a wrist-mounted sensor device, its screen flashing with an urgent message. "Mother," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "We have a situation. Increased seismic activity near the lithium mine. Initial readings suggest a significant structural instability." Seraphina's expression shifted subtly, a flicker of something akin to triumph flashing across her face. "Excellent. A natural opportunity." She turned to Kaelen, her jade eyes gleaming. "This reinforces my point. Your reluctance to embrace your heritage has placed the entire sector at risk. The Loom Network is prepared to offer you a solution, a direct intervention. We have developed a specialized seismic dampening array, capable of stabilizing the mine's foundation. But it requires a precise point of activation, a focused refraction of energy. Someone with your unique abilities." Before Kaelen could respond, Rhea stepped forward, her presence a quiet counterpoint to the escalating tension. She wasn't armed, but her eyes held a steely resolve. Her hands were clenched into fists. "Don't listen to her, Kaelen," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "She's manipulating you. This isn't about stabilizing the mine. It's about using you, about controlling the void." Seraphina laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Rhea, always the sentimental guardian. You misunderstand. We are simply offering a solution to a pressing problem. A problem that could, with a single strategic application of your abilities, be resolved swiftly and efficiently." Kaelen took a measured breath, and as he did, the air around him began to shimmer once more, the subtle distortions expanding, forming a miniature vortex of swirling light and shadow. He didn't speak, but he showed. A faint image, projected with flawless clarity, flickered into existence in the center of the deck, a detailed schematic of the mine's structural integrity, overlaid with thermal readings, stress calculations, and projected seismic patterns. It is a perfect imitation, crafted with an unnerving level of detail, but it wasn't real. It was a manipulation of perception, a brief, controlled slice of reality bent to his will. "You are projecting a false image, Kaelen," Seraphina stated, her voice laced with a grudging admiration. "Impressive, I'll admit, but a clever trick nonetheless. We have advanced sensors capable of detecting even the most subtle distortions." Kaelen allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to play on his lips. He raised his hand, and the projected image vanished, replaced by a sudden, localized disruption in the decks, lighting a momentary blackout that plunged a small section of the observation deck into complete darkness. When the lights returned, a single, perfectly formed drop of viscous iridescent fluid, the essence of the void, clung to Seraphina's outstretched hand. "The universe isn't always what it seems," he said, his voice carrying a quiet weight, "and neither is this offer." He turned to leave, the shimmering distortions surrounding him fading into the ambient light. "I remain, as I always have, a mirror reflecting your ambition, but I will not be your weapon." Chapter 4. The echo of the loom, the silence following, Kaelen's sudden intervention at the festival of the sunken noon hung heavy, thick with the acrid smell of burnt metal and ozone. The remaining enforcers, stunned into a paralysis of fear, were escorted away by a detachment of Vance Loom security, their faces pale and etched with bewildered disbelief. The spectacle hadn't just demonstrated Kaelen's power, it had exposed the horrifying fragility of their carefully constructed reality. His mother, Seraphina Vance, CEO of the Vance Loom Network, maintained a composure that bordered on glacial. Her step forward to kneel before him in the dust was not an expression of affection, but a calculated display of power, a reminder of the corporation's absolute dominion over the region. The sleek obsidian transport materialized with a silent hum, a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding them. Seraphina, clad in a minimalist gray suit that seemed to absorb the harsh sunlight, spoke in a voice devoid of inflection. "You have demonstrated capabilities exceeding our projections, Heir. Your intervention was, shall we say, unorthodox." Her gaze was assessing, cold and precise, like a diagnostic scan. "Explain yourself." Kaelen, seated on a salvaged piece of duracrete, his hands stained with the iridescent sheen of the void essence, remained deliberately enigmatic. "I merely stabilized the situation." The Thorne initiative was a reckless gamble, a blatant disregard for the well-being of the population. A mistake that would have resulted in a far greater loss, not just of life, but of potential. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. The Loom Network, for all its technological advancements, operates on a principle of control. You seek to exploit this region's resources, to strip it bare. I intend to prevent that. Seraphina's lips tightened. "You are questioning the foundation of our operations. The lithium deposits beneath the dust slums are critical to the functionality of our entire military fleet. Their control is essential for the security of the Empire. Security built on oppression is a hollow thing," Kaelen countered, his voice gaining an edge, the faintest shimmer of refracted light dancing around him. "I intend to offer a different kind of security, one built on sustainable development, on mutual respect, and of course, on the judicious application of unconventional methods." He gestured subtly, and a small, almost invisible device, a modified atmospheric sensor attached to his wrist, began to pulse with a cool blue light. It was picking up a faint trace of residual light-bending energy, a lingering echo of the absolute refraction state. "Your technology is impressive, Seraphina," Kaelen said, his eyes fixed on her. "But it is ultimately limited by your understanding of reality. You seek to control light, but you do not understand its nature. It's not merely a wave, it's a reflection of intent, of perception. I've learned to wield that power." Suddenly, the deck of the transport shifted, subtly rotating, creating a disconcerting sense of disorientation. Seraphina, ever the pragmatist, didn't react with alarm. Instead, she deployed a small, handheld device that projected a holographic overlay onto the deck, displaying schematics of the transport's internal systems. "Your methods are intriguing, Kaelen. However, they are also inefficient. We can augment your abilities with our technology, integrate your understanding of spatial refraction with our advanced sensor systems. Together, we could achieve unparalleled control." Kaelen considered her offer, his expression unreadable. "You wish to dissect me, to understand the mechanics of the shimmering void, and then replicate it with your machines. You believe you can contain it, control it." He laughed, a dry, unsettling sound. "You misunderstand. The void isn't a tool to be controlled, it's a state of being." He rose to his feet, the cool light bending around him with increasing intensity. "I am not a weapon to be deployed, Seraphina. I am a reflection. And your ambition, your desire for control, will ultimately be your undoing." Before Seraphina could respond, he activated his ability again. This time, the effect was more pronounced, more deliberate. The transport's holographic projection of the ship's internal systems fractured and distorted, splintering into 1,000 shimmering fragments. The air around Seraphina shimmered and she gasped, clutching her head. What have you done?" she demanded, her voice strained with disorientation. "I've demonstrated the limitations of your technology," Kaelen said, his voice calm and measured. You can project illusions, but you cannot control reality. You can measure distortions, but you cannot comprehend the fundamental nature of space and light. He paused, then extended his hand towards her. In his palm, a single, perfectly formed drop of the void essence pulsed with an ethereal glow. Take this. Study it. Perhaps then you will begin to understand. As Seraphina tentatively reached for the droplet, a faint, rhythmic hum resonated through the transport. The sensors on Kaelen's wrist flared with a blinding light, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he was no longer merely a reflection. He was becoming something more, something ancient, something powerful. The echo of the loom was finding its way into him. Chapter 5. The weavers, not the aftermath of the sunken noon festival, had settled into a tense, shimmering quiet. The dust slums, once a chaotic tangle of desperate lives, were now under a newly erected, shimmering canopy, a testament to Kaelen's swift, decisive action. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, watchful quiet of a battlefield, punctuated by the rhythmic grinding of scrubbers maintaining the newly installed solar panels, a constant reminder of Warden Thorne's reduced state. Rhea, a figure of quiet authority now, oversaw the burgeoning agricultural sanctuary, her face etched with a thoughtful concentration as she directed the planting of drought-resistant blooms. Kaelen, however, remained an enigma, had become a legend. Whispered on the winds, the weaver, they called him. A phantom, capable of unraveling reality itself. His mother, Evelyn Vance, the icy CEO of the Loom Network, had become a reluctant admirer, studying his abilities with a calculated intensity that bordered on obsession. She had begun to subtly alter the corporate structure, funneling resources directly to Rhea's sanctuary, and quietly dismantling the research divisions focused solely on mirroring technology, a clear signal of her intention to absorb the shimmering void's secrets. Seraphina, however, remained a thorn. Her initial disdain had curdled into a chilling fascination, coupled with an unnerving resolve to understand the reflection she had encountered. She had spent weeks obsessively analyzing the fragmented recordings from the transport, cross-referencing sensor data with her team's sophisticated simulations. She had even attempted to replicate Kaelen's displays of light manipulation, resulting only in a series of spectacular, albeit harmless, visual glitches within her own holographic equipment. This pursuit led her to Vance Loom's primary research facility, a colossal structure nestled deep beneath the corporate headquarters. She bypassed layers of security protocols, utilizing a subtly altered drone swarm, a clever adaptation of her own technology designed to mimic the patterns of desert sandstorms. She wasn't looking for Kaelen, she was hunting for the source of his power, a tangible key to unlocking the shimmering void. She found it in Archive 7, a chamber dedicated to the earliest iterations of the Loom Network's research, a collection of forgotten prototypes and archaic technology. The room was dominated by a massive circular device resembling a celestial globe, crafted from a material that seemed to absorb and refract light simultaneously. It was labeled, simply, Project Kairos. As she approached the device, a ripple of distortion spread across the room. The air shimmered, and a voice, ancient and resonant, filled her mind. You seek to understand the weaver's craft. You seek to capture the void. But the void does not lend itself to capture. Kaelen materialized silently beside her, his presence a tangible shift in the atmosphere. He wasn't actively engaged, simply observing, but his very existence felt like a contained storm. Project Kairos represents a failed attempt, Kaelen explained, his voice low and measured, to replicate the shimmering void directly. It attempted to build a device capable of generating controlled spatial refraction, but the energy requirements were catastrophic, the control inherently unstable. The device nearly destroyed itself, and the temporal distortions it created threatened to unravel reality itself. Seraphina's eyes narrowed. You manipulated it. You corrected the instability. Kaelen's expression remained impassive. I stabilized it, yes. But more importantly, I realized the flaw in the approach. The shimmering void isn't a force to be forced, it's a response. A natural expression of the universe's inherent instability. The Loom network, in its relentless pursuit of control, attempted to harness something fundamentally chaotic. It nearly shattered us all. He turned his attention to the globe, extending his hand. As he did, the device began to hum, and the intricate patterns etched onto its surface pulsed with an intensifying light. A complex geometric pattern materialized in the air around him, a three-dimensional representation of the shimmering void itself, a vortex of swirling colors and impossible geometries. Suddenly, the room pulsed with a surge of energy. Seraphina felt a searing pain in her mind, a sensation of being utterly exposed, dissected by a force that understood the very architecture of space and time. Kaelen, seemingly unaffected, manipulated the projection with a series of subtle gestures, weaving the light and space into a complex shifting knot, a representation of the underlying principles of the shimmering void. You perceive light as waves, energy as particles, he said, his voice laced with a dry amusement. But the void is neither. It is the absence of perception, the point where all possibilities converge, where space and time cease to have meaning. He reached out, his fingers tracing the contours of the swirling projection. The true power isn't in bending light, Seraphina. It's in understanding that you are part of the light. You are part of the distortion. As he spoke, the projection intensified, reaching a critical mass. A crack formed within its surface, spreading like a spider web. Before either of them could react, the entire chamber dissolved into a chaotic explosion of light and color, engulfing them in an inescapable wave of refracted reality. Then, just as suddenly, it ceased. The globe was silent, inert. Kaelen stood alone, the faint scent of ozone lingering in the air. A single drop of the void essence pulsing in his palm, no longer a simple droplet, but a miniature vortex of shimmering chaos. He looked at Seraphina, who was slumped against a wall, her eyes glazed with disorientation and a nascent understanding that would haunt her dreams. "The weaving never truly ends," he murmured, his voice echoing with the ancient power he had begun to embrace. "It merely shifts." Chapter 6. The Echo of the Void. The dust slums hadn't fully recovered from the spectacle of the Sovereign of Mirage's intervention. The remnants of the Thorne enforcers, stripped of their weapons and a significant portion of their sanity, were diligently scrubbing solar panels under the relentless glare, a visual testament to Kaelen's absolute power. The agricultural sanctuary, christened Rhea's Bloom, was already a marvel, a bubble of cool, verdant life, nestled amidst the bleached dunes, humming with nutrient recyclers and advanced atmospheric control. Rhea, no longer a refuge operator, oversaw its operation with a quiet authority, her decisions imbued with a surprising strategic depth. Kaelen, however, remained a ghost in his own domain. Had implemented sweeping reforms, restructuring the district's governing council, composed mostly of pragmatic, ex-Thorne loyalists, and diverting the majority of the Loom network's profits directly into the sanctuary's expansion. Yet, he spent most of his time in a secluded chamber carved into the base of a colossal, sandstone mesa, a space dedicated to refining his understanding of the shimmering void. His mother, Seraphina Vance, had installed a suite of sophisticated sensory analysis equipment sensors, designed to detect subtle shifts in light refraction, gravitational anomalies, even the whisper of quantum fluctuations, believing he needed a scientific framework for his abilities. Kaelen found it frustratingly reductive. Today he was working with Seraphina on a particularly complex projection, a full-scale simulation of a collapsing star, designed to model the fractures had glimpsed within the void during the festival of the sunken noon. Seraphina, a glacial figure of severe intellect and unrelenting ambition, meticulously adjusted dials and calibrated readings, her brow furrowed in concentration. The energy signature is fluctuating wildly, Kaelen, she stated. Her voice clipped. The projection isn't stabilizing. It's rejecting your influence. It's not rejecting, Mother, Kaelen replied, his voice calm, almost meditative. He stood before the holographic projection, a swirling vortex of incandescent color, and focused, not on controlling the refraction, but on feeling it. He consciously dampened his own perception, pushing himself toward the absence of perception had described to Seraphina so many times. The void isn't something to be coerced, but understood. It's a river you must flow with its currents, not force yourself against its banks. He began to manipulate the projection with a series of subtle gestures, weaving the light and space into a complex shifting knot, a representation of the underlying principles of the shimmering void. You perceive light as waves, energy as particles, he said, his voice laced with a dry amusement. But the void is neither. It is the absence of perception, the point where all possibilities converge, where space and time cease to have meaning. He reached out, his fingers tracing the contours of the swirling projection. The true power isn't in bending light, Seraphina. It's in understanding that you are part of the light. You are part of the distortion. As he spoke, the projection intensified, reaching a critical mass. A crack formed within its surface, spreading like a spiderweb. Before either of them could react, the entire chamber dissolved into a chaotic explosion of light and color, engulfing them in an inescapable wave of refracted reality. Then, just as suddenly, it ceased. The globe was silent, inert. Kaelen stumbled, momentarily disoriented. Seraphina, however, remained remarkably composed, her expression one of controlled fascination. The air hung thick with the scent of ozone, and something else, a faint, metallic tang, he recognized as the residue of the void essence. Remarkable, she breathed, approaching the now stable projection. The amplitude of the fracture increased by 37.8. It's becoming more coherent. More dangerous. Kaelen ran a diagnostic scan, his fingers flickering with barely perceptible light. The fracture isn't expanding, Seraphina. It's shifting. It's coalescing into a miniature echo. A fragment of the original collapse, trapped within the projection. He cautiously extended his hand, hovering his fingertips over the shimmering surface of the void. I can feel it. A resonance, like a tuning fork struck in a distant chamber. Suddenly, the chamber shifted. Not violently, but subtly, as if the very air was rearranging itself. The holographic projection vanished, replaced by an image, a fleeting, horrifying glimpse of a star collapsing. Not in a predictable supernova, but in a fractured, agonizing implosion, light and matter cascading into an endless vortex. The image lasted only a fraction of a second, but its impact was profound. Kaelen recoiled, instinctively shielding his eyes. Seraphina, however, remained transfixed, her face pale. The void isn't just a tool for defense, Kaelen, she whispered, her voice tight with a fear he hadn't heard before. It's a gate, and we've just opened it. As she spoke, a faint, high-pitched whine filled the chamber, growing steadily louder. The sensors, designed to detect fluctuations in light refraction, began to overload, their screens flashing with chaotic static. Kaelen realized with growing dread that he hadn't simply studied the void had momentarily touched it, and it, in turn, was now touching him. He felt a strange, invasive pressure in his mind, a sensation of being stretched and compressed, of existing simultaneously in multiple dimensions. "Mother!" he shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the escalating cacophony. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the reckoning hadn't ended with the festival of the sunken noon. It had merely begun. Chapter 7, Echoes in the Void. The whine intensified, vibrating not just in the air, but in Kaelen's bones. The holographic projections in the chamber, once meticulously crafted illusions of Vanslooms, opulent headquarters, flickered violently, dissolving into fractured shards of color. The temperature in the room plummeted. A glacial frost settling on the polished steel and holographic displays. Seraphina, still rooted to the spot, began to tremble. Her normally vibrant violet eyes now dull, reflecting the chaotic static of the overloaded sensors. "It's feeding on the refraction," she gasped, clutching at her head. "The void, it's learning to mimic our techniques, amplifying them." Kaelen fought to maintain control, recognizing the danger. The shimmering void wasn't merely a defensive maneuver, it was a delicate dance with the very fabric of reality. To abuse it, to allow it to resonate with external forces, was to invite chaos. He initiated a counter-protocol, a carefully calibrated pulse of light-bending energy designed to disrupt the void's nascent attempts at replication. The effect was immediate, but unsettling. The whine lessened, replaced by a low, guttural hum that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the chamber. "This isn't just manipulation, Kaelen," Seraphina said, her voice a strained whisper. "It's resonance. The void isn't just bending space, it's becoming space. It's creating an echo, a warped reflection of our world within itself." Suddenly, the mirrored shield head erected during the Festival of the Sunken Noon, the one shimmering with purple and gold, rippled violently. It didn't shatter, but the individual particles of refracted light within it began to shift, swirling in a dizzying vortex. He reached out, instinctively trying to stabilize it, but his hand passed through the shimmering surface as if it weren't there. "The projection isn't failing," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "It's decaying. The void is consuming it." That's when he noticed the second image. It wasn't a fleeting glimpse like before, but a full, terrifying tableau. He wasn't looking at a collapsing star, but a landscape, a desolate, crimson wasteland beneath a sky choked with swirling, iridescent clouds. Twisted skeletal structures rose from the dunes, remnants of a civilization utterly consumed by refraction. And then he saw them. Figures vaguely humanoid in shape, drifting through the crimson dust, their bodies shimmering with fractured light. Their eyes vacant, yet somehow knowing. They were the echoes, born from the void's insatiable hunger, extensions of its influence. "These errant projections," Seraphina breathed, her voice laced with horror. "They're aberrations. The void is manifesting its potential, shaping it into physical forms." Before she could finish, one of the figures moved, gliding silently across the floor towards Kaelen. It didn't attack, didn't even seem to register his presence. It simply observed him, its fractured form shimmering with an unnerving intelligence. As it drew closer, Kaelen felt a jolt, a sensation of his own mind being probed, dissected. Fragments of memories, not his own, flooded his awareness, glimpses of countless universes, of realities warped and twisted by the void's influence. He slammed his hands into his eyes, instinctively trying to block out the image, but the intrusion was relentless. He stumbled back, clutching at his head. The counter-protocol had initiated faltering. The low hum intensified, transforming into a deafening roar. The room began to distort, the holographic projections dissolving completely, replaced by a nauseating kaleidoscope of colors and shapes. "We have to sever the connection," he shouted, his voice barely audible above the chaos. He focused his mind, channeling the shimmering void, attempting to create a firewall, a barrier between himself and the encroaching influence. But it was a struggle, a desperate battle against an opponent that seemed to possess an infinite capacity for adaptation. Suddenly, he felt a hand on his arm. It wasn't Seraphina's, it was Valen's. The young baron's face was devoid of malice, replaced with a chillingly detached curiosity. "Impressive, Heir," Valen said, his voice smooth and deceptively calm. "You've unlocked a very potent key. But you're not the only one who understands its potential." He subtly tilted his head, glancing towards the shimmering figure that stood before Kaelen. The void doesn't just consume, you know. It replicates. Valen raised his hand, and the shimmering figure moved, extending a hand of fractured light towards Kaelen. It was a gesture of invitation, an offer of partnership in the chaos. Kaelen realized with a chilling certainty that he hadn't simply opened a gate to the void. He had become a conduit, and Valen, or something far more sinister, was attempting to pull him through. Chapter 8. The Echo of the Void. The initial disorientation clung to Kaelen like sand, a gritty residue of the near cataclysm. The holographic projection of the boardroom his mother, Seraphina Vance, radiating icy disapproval, had vanished entirely, replaced by the unsettling, pulsating reality of the shimmering void. The air thrummed with a low, resonant frequency that vibrated in his bones, and the scent of ozone mixed with the faint, metallic tang of manipulated space. Valen's words echoed in his mind, chillingly precise. The void doesn't just consume, you know. It replicates. He gripped his hands tighter, the familiar ache of the shimmering void flowing through him, a controlled current against a raging tide. He focused, attempting to establish a firmer anchor, a deeper layer of defense. But Valen's intrusion had disrupted the delicate balance. The counter-protocol had initiated a reflexive exertion of the void was sputtering, the low hum threatening to escalate into the deafening roar had experienced before. Suddenly, a hand, cold and impossibly smooth, clamped onto his arm. It wasn't Seraphina's. He recognized the subtle tension in her posture, the practiced refinement of her movements. It was Valen's. The Baron's face was a mask of unsettling detachment, devoid of the usual arrogant smirk. His eyes, normally flashing with predatory amusement, held a chilling, almost clinical curiosity. "Impressive, Heir," Valen said, his voice a carefully modulated whisper. "You've unlocked a very potent key." He tilted his head, a deliberate gesture of observation, his gaze flicking towards the shimmering figure that now stood beside Kaelen, an echo of his own fractured light. "But you're not the only one who understands its potential." He raised his hand, and the shimmering figure, a distorted, fractured reflection of Kaelen himself, moved, extending a hand of fractured light towards him. It was a gesture of invitation, a subtly menacing offer of partnership in the swirling chaos. Kaelen felt a sickening lurch, a deepening sense of being utterly exposed, vulnerable to forces he barely comprehended. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice strained, fighting to maintain control. He instinctively reached for the familiar, grounding sensation of manipulating the refraction around him, attempting to create a protective bubble, a momentary shield. But the void's influence was too strong, too invasive. It was as if someone was actively feeding off his attempts, accelerating the disintegration of his defenses. Valen chuckled, a dry, unsettling sound. "Let's call it symbiosis. The shimmering void isn't merely a martial art, Heir. It's a resonance, a fundamental frequency that exists across dimensions. Your family, the Vance Loom Network, has been unknowingly harnessing this frequency for decades, using it to build your stealth cloaks, your mirages, your empire. But you've only scratched the surface. You've been treating it like a tool, a weapon. We, however, seek to understand it." He took a step closer, his eyes fixed on Kaelen's. "You see, the void doesn't just offer power, it offers convergence. It offers the ability to bridge realities, to tap into forgotten knowledge, to rewrite the very fabric of existence." As Valen spoke, the shimmering figure beside Kaelen shifted, subtly altering its form. It seemed to be absorbing Kaelen's light, intensifying its own fractured glow. Kaelen recognized with growing horror that he wasn't just battling Valen, he was battling a reflection of himself, an echo of his own potential corrupted by the void's seductive whispers. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine pierced the air, originating from the corner of the room. Seraphina Vance materialized, her face a mask of controlled fury. "Kaelen, what in the name of the ancestors is going on here?" I detected a significant surge of spatial distortion, a blatant breach of protocol. Explain yourself? Valen simply smiled, a thin, predatory expression. A delightful demonstration of our shared understanding, Mother. Kaelen is merely exploring the possibilities inherent within the void. A harmless, if somewhat disruptive, experiment. Seraphina's eyes narrowed, calculating, assessing. She immediately recognized the threat posed by Valen's collaboration, a betrayal that reached the deepest levels of her carefully constructed authority. She moved to intercept Kaelen, her hand outstretched. But before she could reach him, Kaelen reacted instinctively. He channeled the void, unleashing a controlled burst of spatial refraction. Not a defensive shield, but a precise, focused wave of energy, directed solely at Seraphina's hand. The effect was instantaneous. Seraphina's hand, shimmering with the same fractured light as the figure beside Kaelen, visibly distorted, the air around it warping and twisting. She recoiled, her face contorted in a mixture of pain and astonishment. The void, it's replicating. It's feeding on our energy, she screamed, her voice laced with primal terror. Valen's laughter rang out, echoing through the room. Precisely. And now, Heir, he said, gesturing to the shimmering figure. It's time to learn how to truly wield its power. The figure reached out again, its fractured hand now grasping for Kaelen's, pulling him towards the deepening vortex of the shimmering void, towards a terrifying convergence of possibilities and dangers. Chapter 9. Echoes of the Void. The ballroom of the Vance, Loom headquarters, throbbed with a disconcerting energy. Seraphina's scream had triggered a chain reaction, not of destruction, but of unsettling replication. The fractured light, once a localized phenomenon around Kaelen, was now spreading, leaching from the opulent fabrics, the polished obsidian floors, even the swirling holographic projections depicting the Loom network's global operations. It was as if the void wasn't simply bending space, it was consuming it, layering it with fractured echoes. Kaelen, guided by a primal instinct he barely understood, felt the void beckoning, a cool, insistent pull. Valen, a chillingly detached smile plastered on his face, watched the escalating chaos with a morbid fascination. Remarkable, isn't it, Father? He said, his voice dripping with sardonic amusement. Your daughter's instinctive understanding of the void, combined with your own, is proving exceptionally potent. But it's hungry, Kaelen, and unchecked, it will consume us all. Seraphina, her face pale and slick with sweat, tried to regain control. Containment protocols. Initiate lockdown. Seal off the primary conduits, she barked, her voice strained and desperate. Technicians frantically rerouted power, attempting to dampen the spreading luminescence, but the effect was minimal. The light, now a kaleidoscope of shifting colors, pulsed with increasing intensity, threatening to overwhelm the building's defenses. Kaelen ignored the frantic activity. He focused on the sensation emanating from Seraphina's hand, the chilling drain of her own energy. He reached out, not with aggression, but with a strange, empathetic understanding. He wasn't trying to control her, but to soothe the burgeoning tendrils of the void that had taken root within her. It isn't malice, Seraphina, he said, his voice low and steady, battling the rising tide of the shimmering void's influence. It's simply imbalance. This place, this control, this relentless pursuit of power, it has created a wound in reality. The void is not an enemy, but a reflection of that wound. As he spoke, a tendril of fractured light detached itself from Seraphina's hand, spiraling towards him, not to attack, but to gently brush against his own skin. He didn't flinch. Instead, he visualized the chaotic, fragmented patterns of the void, and attempted to harmonize them, to guide the energy into a coherent stream. It was like attempting to sculpt a river with a single hand, a delicate dance between control and surrender. Suddenly, Valen moved, breaking the tense stalemate. He activated a wrist-mounted device, a miniature focusing emitter designed to amplify and direct energy. "Stop!" he commanded, aiming the device at Kaelen. A beam of pure, concentrated light lanced out, striking Kaelen's chest with brutal force. This wasn't a simple energy blast. This was a deliberate attempt to disrupt his control, to sever the link head established with the void. As the light struck, Kaelen felt a searing pain, a wrenching sensation as the void within him threatened to shatter. But instead of resisting, he embraced it, allowing the energy to flow through him, becoming a conduit, a channel. The effect was breathtaking. The beam of light, instead of harming him, began to unravel itself, its photons fracturing into countless shimmering fragments. The shattered light particles, responding to Kaelen's will, began to orbit him, forming a pulsating defensive shell, not a static shield, but a fluid, dynamic construct of shifting light and refraction. Seraphina stared in disbelief. "Impossible!" she gasped, realizing the full extent of Kaelen's power. "You're not just manipulating light, you're absorbing it, amplifying it, turning it against us." Valen's smile widened, revealing a flash of predatory teeth. "Indeed. And now," he said, gesturing to the ever-expanding shell of fractured light, "we have a truly formidable weapon." The room was plunged into absolute darkness, as the amplified void created a localized eclipse. The entire ballroom enveloped in a swirling vortex of shifting colors. Kaelen, suspended within the heart of the storm, felt the void reaching into his mind, probing, searching, seeking to understand the source of his power. Then, a voice, ancient and resonant, echoed within him, not his own, but a chorus of voices from countless generations of shimmering void warriors. "The loom does not weave reality, it unravels it." Kaelen understood. His family wasn't merely controlling the arrow weave, they were fundamentally disrupting the fabric of space-time, exploiting the inherent instability of the universe for their own gain. The shimmering void wasn't a martial art, it was a defense, a countermeasure against this insidious corruption. Suddenly, he snapped out of the trance. With a focused thought, he unleashed a controlled pulse of refracted energy, directed not at Seraphina or Valen, but at the primary loom network console, the central control nexus for the arrow weave. The console exploded in a shower of sparks, the holographic projections flickering and dying, and the shimmering fibers of the arrow weave itself began to unravel, cascading downwards like a frozen waterfall. "It's over," Kaelen stated, his voice filled with a quiet certainty. "The illusion is broken." Chapter 10. The echo of unraveling. The aftermath of Kaelen's impulsive act hung thick in the air, a tangible residue of disrupted energy and shattered illusions. The ballroom, once a monument to the Vance loom's opulent control, resembled a collapsed cathedral. Opulent fragments of holographic murals clung to the shattered pillars, reflecting the now muted emergency lights. Seraphina, the CEO, was a statue of stunned fury, her perfectly sculpted face frozen in a mask of disbelief. Valen, predictably, was sputtering with rage, his expensive hoverbike ripped apart, its polished chassis gleaming with fractured light. You destroyed everything!" he shrieked, gesturing wildly at the unraveling console. 30 years of research, reduced to ash. Do you realize the implications? Kaelen remained motionless, a study in composed power. The swirling, iridescent echo of the shimmering void lingered around him, a subtle shimmer in the air that made the already chaotic scene feel even more surreal. He didn't engage in the fury directed at him. Instead, he turned his gaze towards Rhea, who had followed him into the ballroom, her face etched with a cautious understanding. "The lumen isn't about control, Valen," Kaelen said, his voice a low, resonant hum. "It's more keen. Use me. About exploitation. About ripping holes in reality to create profit. My family didn't build a global network, they built a weapon." His words, delivered with a chilling calm, seemed to momentarily silence Valen. The younger Thorne, accustomed to commanding obedience, found himself confronted with an unsettling truth, a revelation delivered by the very man had been attempting to intimidate. Seraphina, however, recovered first. With a glacial movement, she approached Kaelen, her expression shifting from rage to a calculating coolness. "You've demonstrated a remarkable talent, Vance," she stated, her voice precise and devoid of emotion. "A dangerous talent. But you've also revealed a critical weakness, a single, impulsive act of defiance. We will contain this, neutralize it." Kaelen simply nodded, a flicker of something akin to pity in his eyes. Containment is a futile exercise when dealing with a force that fundamentally alters reality. "You've been playing with shadows, Seraphina. Now, you'll learn that shadows have a way of returning." Before Seraphina could respond, a soft, pulsating light emanated from Kaelen's hands, mirroring the initial display in the courtyard during the festival. The shattered fragments of the Loom Network console began to reassemble themselves, drawn together by an unseen force, weaving themselves back into a functional, albeit damaged, structure. But it wasn't the sleek, polished technology of the original. This was a crude, Frankensteinian reconstruction, patched together with salvaged fiber wire and raw energy. "Interesting," Seraphina murmured, her eyes narrowing. "You're not just repairing the system, you're adapting it." Kaelen ignored her observation, focusing his attention on the swirling void around him. The ancient voices, the chorus of the shimmering void warriors, intensified, whispering within his mind, guiding him. "The fabric is weak. Use its flaws." He realized Seraphina wasn't just trying to contain him, she was anticipating him, attempting to redirect his power. The Loom Network, even in its damaged state, was designed to exert control, to project and manipulate. But Kaelen, now attuned to the void, saw its vulnerabilities with brutal clarity. He began to subtly alter the flow of energy through the console, not to repair it, but to introduce deliberate distortions, to amplify the existing flaws in the system's architecture. It was a delicate dance, a precise manipulation of spatial refraction, much like the shimmering void itself. As he worked, the remaining holographic projections flickered wildly, displaying fragmented images of the dust slums, the refugee shelter, even Rhea tending to the wounded. The effect wasn't destructive, but profoundly disorienting. "What are you doing?" Valen demanded, his voice laced with panic. "I'm showing you your reality," Kaelen replied, his voice barely a whisper. "The one you've been so diligently trying to erase." Suddenly, the ballroom plunged into darkness. Not a gradual dimming, but an instantaneous, absolute blackness. The emergency lights sputtered and died. The only illumination came from the swirling void surrounding Kaelen, now significantly expanded, consuming the entire space with its mesmerizing luminescence. Then, a single, clear voice, not the ancient chorus, but a focused projection originating from the partially repaired Loom Network console, spoke directly into his mind. It was Seraphina's. "You cannot comprehend the scale of what you've unleashed. The void isn't a weapon, Vance. It's a singularity. And singularities, by their very nature, consume." Kaelen didn't flinch. He reached out with the shimmering void, a tendril of refracted light extending from his hand, grasping at the projection. He didn't attack. He didn't attempt to destroy. He simply absorbed. As he absorbed Seraphina's projected consciousness, a horrifying realization dawned on him. She hadn't been trying to control him. She knew he was the key. She hadn't feared his power, shed deliberately cultivated it, preparing him to be the ultimate instrument of chaos, a pawn in a game far grander and more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. The illusion of control had been meticulously crafted, all leading to this single catastrophic moment. Chapter 11. Echoes in the Void. The silence following Seraphina's chilling pronouncements hung thicker than the dust motes dancing in the residual glow of the void. The ballroom, now devoid of any light save for the expanding, iridescent bubbles surrounding Kaelen, felt less like a space and more like a contained, fracturing dimension. The remaining members of the Loom Network board, faces pale and etched with a terror that transcended mere fear, remained frozen, a tableau of stunned disbelief. Even Valen, momentarily stunned into silence, recovered first, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of his scimitar, a futile gesture in the face of the utterly incomprehensible. "Explain yourself, Seraphina," Kaelen commanded, his voice resonating with a newfound certainty, a consequence of absorbing a fragment of her vast, ancient consciousness. The swirling void seemed to pulse with his words, momentarily intensifying the chromatic display. Shards of amethyst, emerald, and gold coalescing into fleeting geometric patterns. The projection, previously a clear, sterile voice, now possessed a subtle, layered quality, as if multiple voices were struggling for dominance within the confines of his mind. "You are a culmination, Vance. A carefully sculpted catalyst. The Loom Network wasn't built for control, it was built for observation, for understanding the very nature of manipulation, of illusion. Your lineage carries the echoes of the architects, the first to master spatial refraction, those who wove the very fabric of reality itself." The revelation hit Kaelen with the force of a physical blow. The Vance Loom Network, the global conglomerate Head inherited, wasn't simply a manufacturer of stealth technology, it was a repository of a forgotten martial art, a lineage of weaponized illusion that had been deliberately concealed and suppressed for millennia. "My mother, she knew?" Kaelen asked, the question laced with a bitter realization. The fractured voice of Seraphina echoed, "She saw potential in you, a raw, untamed conduit. But potential is a dangerous thing, especially when combined with unchecked ambition." The architects vanished, not because they failed, but because they realized the extent of their power. They understood the inevitable entropy of creation, the tendency of even the most meticulously crafted illusions to unravel. Suddenly, the void began to contract, the iridescent colors receding, pulling back towards Kaelen's outstretched hand. It was as if he were not actively controlling it, but rather gently coaxing it back into submission. "You've awakened something ancient, something hungry, Vance." Seraphina's voice deepened, now tinged with a palpable sense of regret. "The shimmering void isn't merely a martial art. It's a fragment of the primordial chaos, from which all reality springs. It's a reflection of the limitless potential for change, for destruction, for rebirth." Kaelen felt a tremor within him, a resonance of the void's raw power. He realized Seraphina hadn't simply revealed a secret shed, initiated a chain reaction, unlocking dormant abilities within him that he hadn't even known existed. The careful, controlled manipulation of spatial refraction, Head honed as a Mirage-Patcher, was now amplified exponentially, fueled by the ancient energy of the shimmering void. "The architects didn't vanish," Kaelen said, his voice gaining strength. They retreated into the void, waiting for a worthy vessel." He raised his hand again, and the void, now significantly diminished but still intensely luminous, expanded once more. This time, however, it wasn't a chaotic, uncontrolled surge of power. He focused, channeling his will, bending the refracted light not outwards, but inwards, towards the Loom Network console. The console, a marvel of shimmering metal and holographic displays, began to flicker erratically. Warning signals flashed across its surface, red and white warnings colliding in a digital maelstrom. "You're destabilizing the network," Warden Thorne shrieked, his voice hoarse with panic. "You're tearing apart the fabric of our reality." Kaelen ignored him. He wasn't destroying the console, he was unraveling its programming, dismantling the carefully constructed layers of deception and control that had sustained the Loom Network's influence for centuries. He wasn't merely rewriting code, he was dissolving the very foundations upon which their power was built, the illusion of control. As the last vestiges of the Loom Network's programming dissolved, Seraphina's voice ceased entirely. The remaining void shimmered, then abruptly collapsed, shrinking back into the confines of his hand. The ballroom was plunged back into darkness, but this time it wasn't a blank void. A single, perfectly formed crystal, pulsating with the same ethereal light as the void, rested in his palm. "The key," he murmured, turning to face Rhea, who had cautiously approached him, her expression a mixture of awe and fear. "The key to understanding, and perhaps to controlling, the echo of the architects." Rhea, her eyes wide with comprehension, took a hesitant step forward. "It's beautiful, but terrifying. What have you done, Kaelen?" Kaelen looked at the crystal, then back at the stunned faces of the Loom Network board, and finally at Rhea, her gaze filled with quiet strength. "I've started to rebuild," he said, a hint of weary determination in his voice. "And this time, the foundations will be built not on illusion, but on truth." Chapter 12. The Echo of Stone. The dust slums, once a suffocating tapestry of desperation woven with holographic projections, felt different. Not pristine, certainly. The air still carried the grit of the endless dunes, and the repurposed solar panels reflecting the harsh sun offered little comfort. But a strange ordered calm had settled over the settlement, a calm born not of control, but of stunned disbelief. The sight of 50 enforcers, meticulously scrubbing the silicate tiles of the new solar farms under the watchful eye of a visibly uncomfortable Warden Thorne, was a testament to Kaelen's sudden, decisive power. Kaelen, clad in practical, sun-bleached linen trousers and a simple tunic, moved with a deliberate grace, overseeing the work with a quiet authority that hadn't been there before. Rhea, now adorned with a woven sash of shimmering silver thread, a small, subtle reward from Kaelen, served as his liaison, a calming presence mediating between the bewildered workers and the resentful remnants of the Thorne family's influence. The agricultural sanctuary, a shimmering dome of light-bending fabric anchored to the bedrock, was a marvel of both ancient techniques and Loom Network technology, seamlessly blending the old with the new. "The optical sensors are registering a slight fluctuation in the refractive index," reported Master Jian, a wizened scholar brought in to refine the system's precision, his face perpetually shaded by a complex array of lenses. "It's subtle, but persistent, almost as if someone is intentionally attempting to disrupt the light flow." Kaelen stopped, his hand instinctively moving to the small, almost imperceptible scar beneath his left wrist, the point of entry for the shimmering void. "Focus the diagnostics on the central aperture," he commanded, his voice low, but carrying a weight that silenced the immediate commotion. "I want to know exactly what's being projected." Within moments, the holographic displays surrounding the central control station flickered with data. The source of the disruption wasn't a deliberate attack, but a resonant echo, a tiny, localized refraction, mimicking the signature of the void itself. Someone was trying to reactivate the dormant architecture of the art, attempting to coax the illusionary manipulation back into existence. Valen, reduced to scrubbing solar panels, watched with a simmering hatred. He hadn't entirely abandoned his aggressive tendencies. He simply channeled them into a carefully constructed facade of meek compliance. "It's a trick, Vance," he hissed to a passing worker, "a clever trick to waste our time." Kaelen ignored him, his gaze fixed on the diagnostics. "It's a student," he murmured, recognizing the flawed execution, the tentative grasp at a power too ancient, too volatile, to be wielded carelessly. Someone seeking to understand the shimmering void. He turned to Rhea, who was observing the proceedings with a thoughtful frown. "Do you recognize this pattern, Rhea?" Rhea studied the holographic projections, her brow furrowed. "There's a single file within the Loom Network's archives designated Project Echo Data. It documented attempts made centuries ago to replicate the shimmering void, but all were ultimately abandoned due to the inherent instability. "It seems someone hasn't abandoned the attempt," Kaelen said grimly. "And they're using the very foundations of the Loom Network's deception to guide them." Suddenly, a low hum filled the air, growing in intensity. The shimmering dome of the agricultural sanctuary pulsed with an unsettling light, and the refractive index readings spiked dramatically. The air shimmered, resolving into a fleeting image, a fragmented silhouette of a scholar, clad in ancient robes, manipulating light with terrifying precision. It was a projection of pure intent, a desperate attempt to bridge the gap between the past and the present. "They're attempting to create a miniature void," Kaelen realized, his hands instinctively reaching for the controls of the sanctuary's shielding system. A localized pocket of spatial refraction, powerful enough to disrupt us. He moved with a speed that belied his calm demeanor, his feet barely seeming to touch the ground as he channeled the shimmering void. The ambient light in the sanctuary warped, bending around him like water, creating a protective bubble of absolute clarity. Valen, seeing Kaelen's move, roared with fury and charged, drawing his energy scimitar. But Kaelen simply raised his hand, and the scimitar vanished mid-air, swallowed by the refracted light. With a controlled burst of energy, he solidified a wall of hard light pressure, pinning Valen to the ground, the weapon dissolving back into nothingness. "You can't just brute force this, Valen," Kaelen said, his voice resonating with controlled power. "You're playing with forces you don't understand." As Valen struggled against the invisible restraint, a new figure materialized within the shimmering dome, the scholar from the holographic projection, now solid and real, his eyes burning with an unsettling intensity. He wore robes woven from a material that seemed to absorb and refract light simultaneously, and his hands moved with a practiced grace, attempting to mimic Kaelen's movements. "You are attempting to stifle the flow," the scholar said, his voice strangely melodic, to deny the echo its expression. Kaelen stared at him, a grim understanding dawning. "You don't realize," he said, his voice laced with a profound sadness, "that the shimmering void isn't just about manipulating space. It's about acknowledging the echoes of everything that has been, everything that could be. Trying to suppress them is like trying to hold back the tide." Chapter 13. The echoes of stone. The dust-stained air of the agricultural sanctuary pulsed with a strange, subdued energy. The climate-controlled dome, a testament to Kaelen's swift and ruthless action, hummed with the gentle whir of atmospheric regulators, mimicking the lost desert ecosystem within its shimmering walls. Lush, genetically engineered cacti flourished alongside carefully cultivated rice paddies, reflecting the diffused light in an unsettlingly perfect imitation of a midday sun. Rhea, now impeccably dressed in a flowing tunic woven with threads that subtly shifted color, oversaw the distribution of nutrient paste, a far cry from her days of rationing cactus milk with a quiet authority that bordered on regal. Kaelen, however, remained restless. The victory felt incomplete. The raw spectacle of the shimmering void had impressed the surviving enforcers and the frightened residents of the dust slums, but it had also attracted unwanted attention, specifically the attention of the scholar, whose name, Head learned, was Gian. Gian was a repository of lost lore, a descendant of the ancient masters who originally cultivated the shimmering void. Head appeared seemingly from nowhere during the confrontation with Valen, a disconcerting presence draped in paradoxical light, and now he was a constant, unsettling shadow in Kaelen's periphery. "Your use of the void is clumsy, Heir," Gian said, his voice a measured cadence, as he observed Kaelen practicing the core movements of the art. Kaelen was attempting to generate a localized refraction, a simple ripple in the air to demonstrate the basic principle of manipulating light. Instead, he was creating a swirling vortex of iridescent dust, momentarily disrupting the carefully maintained atmosphere of the sanctuary. "Clumsy?" Kaelen's voice was low, controlled. You saw me incapacitate 50 enforcers with a single gesture. I hardly think that qualifies as clumsiness. It is not the scale, Heir, but the understanding, Jian countered, stepping closer. You treat the void as a weapon, a tool for control. It is something far more profound. It's a conduit, a connection to the fabric of existence itself. To simply bend light is to deny its inherent resonance. Kaelen paused, lowering his hand. He recognized the truth in Jian's words. Had been so focused on leveraging the void's destructive potential, acquiring wealth, punishing his enemies that he hadn't truly grasped its core principles. Had been treating it like a sophisticated gadget, a tool to be wielded, rather than an ancient, sentient power. The Vance Loom network doesn't understand this, does it? Kaelen asked, gesturing around the sanctuary. They've weaponized the void, turning it into a system for projecting illusions, for controlling perception. They don't see the beauty, the potential, only the strategic advantage. Jian nodded slowly. Your family's ambition is a stain upon the shimmering void. They sought to manufacture reality, not to harmonize with it. They sought to dominate, not to understand. Suddenly, the automated irrigation system sputtered and died, plunging a section of the rice paddies into shadow. A small hovering drone, designated to monitor water levels, began to spin wildly, emitting a series of frantic beeps. What is happening? Rhea demanded, rushing towards the malfunctioning drone. Kaelen stepped forward, extending his hand. As his fingers brushed the drone's casing, the light around it shimmered violently, bending and twisting in a dizzying display. The drone ceased its erratic movements, settling gracefully back into its designated orbit. The void is reactive, Kaelen explained. It's responding to disruptions, to imbalances. It's like a living echo, amplifying the chaos. Jian observed the demonstration with a thoughtful expression. You are beginning to perceive the truth there. The void doesn't simply refract light. It reflects intent. It amplifies emotion. It is not a thing to be controlled, but a thing to be guided, to be communed with. As he spoke, the air in the sanctuary began to shift, subtly altering its composition. The diffused sunlight seemed to intensify, bathing the room in a richer, warmer glow. Kaelen felt a strange resonance within him, a deep, instinctive understanding of the swirling patterns of light and shadow around him. He realized with a startling clarity that Jian hadn't merely been observing him, had been subtly influencing him, guiding his perception through the very fabric of the void. Then, a new sound cut through the rhythmic hum of the sanctuary, a high-pitched whine, growing steadily louder. The holographic projections, usually stable and unwavering, began to flicker, displaying fragmented images of the dust slums, the burning sun, Valen's sneering face, Rhea's protective embrace. Jian's eyes widened, a flicker of alarm crossing his features. You've disturbed the echoes, Heir, he shouted. The past is attempting to reclaim its present. Before Kaelen could react, a translucent figure materialized within the shimmering dome, a spectral warrior clad in ancient shimmering armor. He raised a hand, and a wave of pure, concentrated light erupted from his palm, striking Kaelen with the force of a physical blow. Kaelen instinctively activated the shimmering void, erecting a protective wall of refracted light around himself. But this time, the void felt different, corrupted, strained, as if struggling against an external force. He realized with a chilling certainty that Jian wasn't just a scholar, he was a guardian, a sentinel against the void's misuse. And he was fighting him. Chapter 14. The echo of the void. The air in the sanctuary thrummed with an unsettling energy, a low, dissonant hum that resonated deep within Kaelen's bones. The shimmering dome, usually a bastion of controlled light, pulsed with a frantic, unstable rhythm, mirroring the fractured projections that still flickered across the holographic displays. Rhea, her face etched with a cautious worry, gripped a steaming cactus milk flask, offering it to him with a hesitant hand. "Drink, Kaelen," she urged, her voice barely a murmur above the escalating chaos. "It might help steady you." Kaelen accepted the flask, his fingers still tingling with the residual impact of Jian's attack. The shimmering void, normally a fluid, responsive extension of his will, felt strained, choked. It was like trying to force a river through a narrow gorge. The flow was turbulent, resistant, and leaking energy with every desperate attempt to maintain its integrity. Jian's words, sharp and laden with urgency, echoed in his mind. "You've disturbed the echoes. Heir!" The past is attempting to reclaim its present. The spectral warrior, a wraith of shimmering bronze and jade, remained suspended within the dome. His hand still raised, a pillar of corrupted light radiating outwards. He was older than time, his armor bearing the faded sigils of a forgotten dynasty, the Jia clan, known in ancient texts as the Shadow Weavers, masters of a corrupted variant of the shimmering void, a practice considered heresy by the Vance Loom Network. This wasn't a simple guardian, it was a predator, drawn to the raw power of Kaelen's mastery. "He's not attacking me directly, is he?" Kaelen asked, his voice strained, directing the question to Jian, who was meticulously analyzing the fluctuating projections with a furrowed brow. "Is feeding on the distortions? Amplifying them?" Jian nodded grimly. "The void is a delicate balance, Heir. It reflects, it refracts, but it doesn't create. This warrior has a dissonance, a pocket of fractured time, deliberately disrupting the flow. He's attempting to reshape your connection to the void, to twist it to his own ends." Suddenly, the main projection shifted. Instead of the burning courtyard, the holographic display focused on a single horrific image. Kaelen, as a child, learning to manipulate the shimmering fiber under his grandfather's watchful eye. But this wasn't the gentle guidance he remembered. This child Kaelen was consumed by rage, his hands glowing with an unnaturally intense light, ripping apart a stack of holographic tarps with a savage ferocity. The image solidified, and a voice, Kaelen's own, young and raw with unchecked power, echoed across the room. "Let them see. Let them know my power." "As pulling from your memories," Jian whispered, his voice tight with alarm. "Your initial encounters with the void, your uncontrolled outbursts. Hez using them to corrupt your control." Kaelen felt a surge of nausea, a visceral understanding of the extent of his youthful recklessness. The raw, untamed potential of the shimmering void had terrified him as a boy. Had suppressed it, locked it away, believing control meant suppression. But the Zhao clan warrior wasn't interested in control, he was interested in unleashing chaos. Just as Kaelen realized he needed to act, a new element appeared in the chaotic tableau. A second, smaller spectral figure materialized beside the Zhao warrior. This one was clad in obsidian armor, etched with swirling patterns of shadow and ice. He carried a wickedly curved blade crafted from solidified darkness, and his eyes burned with an icy blue light. "The Silent Shade," Jian hissed, recognizing the warrior instantly. "A lieutenant of the Zhao clan, specializing in negating spatial refraction. Hez designed to counter your void." The Silent Shade launched a swift, silent attack. A wave of compressed darkness surged towards Kaelen, attempting to smother the shimmering void before it could fully form. Kaelen reacted instinctively, expanding the protective barrier, but the darkness pressed against it with unrelenting force, causing the shimmering fibers to strain and crackle. "He's targeting the core," Jian shouted, frantically calculating the energy fluctuations. "You need to sever his connection to the source." Kaelen understood. The Zhao warrior wasn't simply feeding on distortions, he was actively attempting to disrupt the very foundation of his connection to the shimmering void. He needed to attack the source, Jian's own channeling of the void. Without warning, Kaelen focused his will, not on shielding himself, but on Jian. A wave of refracted light washed over the scholar, momentarily disrupting his concentration, scattering the fragmented projections. and momentarily throwing him off balance. The Zhao warrior roared in frustration, his attacks momentarily disrupted. The silent shade seized the opportunity, lunging towards Kaelen with his dark blade. As the blade descended, Kaelen didn't attempt to evade. Instead, he embraced the chaos, deliberately letting the shimmering void buckle and warp around him. The air around him shimmered violently, and for a fleeting moment, Valen's sneering face, distorted and fractured, flashed into existence within the blade's trajectory, a horrifying premonition. Chapter 15. The Echo of Shadows. The rain arrived, not as a gentle blessing, but as a brutal, white-hot cascade. It wasn't water, not entirely. The atmospheric shield, already strained to the breaking point by Kaelen's intervention, and the Zhao's incessant assault, was hemorrhaging its refracted light, condensing it into a superheated, stinging downpour. The dust slums, momentarily stabilized, were now drowning in a corrosive glaze that stripped the holographic tarps bare, revealing the raw, cracked metal beneath. Kaelen stood beneath the relentless assault, the shimmering purple and gold of his void shield pulsing with frantic energy. The air thrummed with the raw force of his ability, a counterpoint to the storm's chaotic rage. Rhea, soaked and shivering, worked tirelessly alongside him, meticulously reweaving fibers into new protective panels, her movements a blur of practiced efficiency. The agricultural sanctuary, a nascent green bloom amidst the devastation, pulsed with a regulated warmth, a fragile bubble of stability against the encroaching chaos. Jian, ever the analytical mind, monitored the energy fluctuations from a small, shielded console head established near the perimeter. "The Zhao is pushing harder," he reported, his voice tight with concern. Hes not just disrupting the void is actively feeding on its instability. It's creating a feedback loop, amplifying the distortions. "He wants to burn us out," Kaelen said, his voice low and focused, barely audible above the hiss of the storm. "Hes not seeking to destroy, Hes seeking to corrupt. He wants to unravel the shimmering void and twist it into something darker." Suddenly, the violet shimmer of the void shield intensified, reacting violently to a new, precise wave of energy. It wasn't the Zhao's direct attack. It was a subtle, almost undetectable ripple, an echo of something far more ancient and unsettling. "There's another signature," John shouted, frantically adjusting his instruments. "A resonance, originating from beneath the dunes. It's ancient, incredibly powerful. It's not aligned with the void, but it's aware of it." Before he could elaborate, the rain shifted. Not in intensity, but in composition. The burning, acidic droplets dissolved into a thick, swirling mist, laced with a deep, obsidian black. As it enveloped Kaelen, the void shield shuddered violently, and the familiar, comforting twilight vanished. Instead, he was surrounded by a suffocating darkness, an absolute absence of light. He felt it then, a touch, cold and deliberate, like a spider's leg across his skin. The sensation wasn't physical. It was a violation of perception, a jarring intrusion into the very architecture of his mind. The absolute refraction state flickered, threatened to collapse. "He's probing the void," Jian yelled, his voice strained. "Hes trying to destabilize your connection. Focus, Kaelen. Maintain the shield." Kaelen fought against the encroaching darkness, pushing back with a concentrated burst of refracted light. The void shield flared, pushing the black mist back momentarily, revealing fragments of distorted faces, a lineage of warriors, shrouded in shadows, each bearing the same haunted expression. Valen's briefly, with a chillingly accurate caricature of his arrogant smirk. Then, a voice, not spoken but felt, resonated within his mind. It was ancient, vast, and utterly devoid of emotion. "The loom is a cage. The void is a reflection. You seek to control what you cannot comprehend." He realized then that the Zhao wasn't just disrupting him, he was offering him a glimpse, a terrifying, unavoidable truth. The Vance Loom Network wasn't just a corporation. It was a nexus of controlled reality, a meticulously constructed illusion masking a deeper, darker purpose. And the shimmering void wasn't a weapon, it was a consequence, a parasitic echo of that same hidden reality. Without conscious thought, Kaelen shifted his focus, abandoning the defensive strategy. He didn't attempt to counter the darkness, he embraced it. He allowed the void shield to unravel, to become a chaotic, swirling vortex of refracted light and shadow, a mirror reflecting the encroaching void. As the last vestiges of the shield dissolved, a figure emerged from the swirling darkness. It wasn't the Zhao, a warrior consumed by blind aggression. It was a warrior of immense age and power, clad in armor forged from what appeared to be solidified shadow, wielding a weapon that resembled a fractured shard of obsidian, radiating a cold, suffocating aura. His face was obscured by a helm shaped like a stylized raven's skull. "You have exposed yourself, Heir," the warrior said, his voice a rasping whisper that seemed to originate from the darkness itself. "The echoes of the past are not meant to be silenced. They are meant to be remembered." Before Kaelen could react, the warrior lunged, the obsidian shard slicing through the black mist with lethal precision. It didn't strike Kaelen directly. It struck the ground where he would have been, carving a perfect, circular hole into the already ravaged earth, a hole that seemed to suck the light itself out of the area. The rain intensified, and the darkness, now laced with an even more unsettling energy, seemed to press in on all sides. Kaelen knew, with a chilling certainty, that he was no longer merely fighting a warrior. He was facing the consequence of his family's legacy. He was facing the truth he had been desperately trying to ignore.